everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor podcast. I'm Kim Scott, co-founder of Radical Candor and Just Work.
And I'm Jason Rosoff, CEO and co-founder of Radical Candor.
And I'm Amy Sandler, your host for the Radical Candor podcast. Welcome to season 4. Want to give some extra welcomes, Kim, Jason, as we kick this off? Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome. We have to say it 4 times. Welcome. Season 4.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I didn't even think of that. You're just, we're already learning so much. But today we're going to talk about how, in order to build and sustain a great team, you need to understand how each person's job actually fits into their life goals. You need to get to know each person who reports directly to you and have a real human relationship with them. Because building a team is hard, but as we're seeing now during the Great Resignation, if you fail to spend time building and investing a team, it can have disastrous consequences. According to research from Gallup, one of the most disruption-proof, time-tested human needs is for development. People demand growth and development. And so in order to be successful, this means developing people who are on both steep and gradual growth trajectories, or as we like to say at Radical Candor, people who are in either rockstar mode or superstar mode. Kim, can you explain the difference between rockstar mode and superstar mode and why it's so important to recognize and develop people in each mode equally?
Sure, absolutely. This is something I got wrong for a lot of my career. I thought everyone on a team ought to be in superstar mode. So what is the difference, first of all, between superstar and rockstar mode? This is, when I was at Apple, I was working with a leader who said, you really need to manage your people who are in rockstar mode differently from people who are in superstar mode. And I was like, what the hell is she talking about? What's the difference between the two? And she explained to me that people who are in superstar mode are the people who are growing really fast. They want the next big job. They don't just want your job, their boss's job. They want their boss's job. They're on a super steep growth trajectory. But people who are in rockstar mode are like your Rock of Gibraltar. These are the people who are great at their job, but they don't necessarily want the next big job. And there's a variety of reasons why folks are in rockstar mode at different parts in their career. And if you think about it, people, when they're in superstar mode, those are the sources of growth on your team. But people, when they are in rockstar mode, that's a source of stability on your team. And you need both. If you don't want the wheels to come off the proverbial bus, you need a certain number of people who are in rockstar mode. Different managers handle this differently. There are also managers who tend to clip the wings of people when they're in superstar mode and not allow them to grow in the way they want to grow. And that hurts those individuals, but it also hurts the whole team.
Jason, when you hear Kim talk about rockstar mode and superstar mode, how do you, sorry, I can't help but say that, superstar mode.
Superstar.
How do you actually figure out who is in what mode, especially now, because it might be changing quite rapidly for folks?
This is a good question. I feel like there's a subset of the world of analyzing work right now that's trying to just sort of figure out what is happening to people in the context of global pandemic, et cetera. And I thought you and Kim had a great sort of side discussion about this, which is essentially that given all that we're needing to learn to do collectively to adapt to living through the pandemic, we're all sort of in superstar mode because our jobs are changing quickly. We're developing new skills rapidly. And I would say, I think that's obvious for people who have gone from in-person to remote work, but it's also true, for people who work in a grocery store who have to figure out entirely new ways to clean things. They had to figure out that they have new systems for screening people and all this stuff that just didn't exist before. So I think it is a little confusing right now.
Like it or not, ready or not, here we come. We're none of us signed up to be in superstar mode around the pandemic, but here we find ourselves. It's exhausting.
It is exhausting, and it is exposed. I think the reason for the Great Resignation is it exposed that people were close to or at a limit that they had for their desire or energy to continue sort of like learn, grow, and develop in their current role, for lots of reasons, right? Maybe they wasn't just particularly interesting from a career perspective, or maybe, they weren't being treated that great, but given the responsibilities of the job, they sort of felt like it was manageable, and all of a sudden it's not manageable anymore. So it's a confusing time to try to figure this out. But I do generally think that there's sort of like looking at your ambition for growth at work is a way to narrow that down a little bit, right? Because there's a difference between saying, look, I really hate this COVID stuff, but I get that we have to all learn it at the same time. That kind of stinks. But I'm excited about growing new skills quickly. Like I feel like I'm sort of stuck where I am now. And what I really want to do is I want to grow, like maybe it's promotion, or maybe I just want to become more expert at what I'm doing now. And I feel like I need bigger and hairier challenges in order to do that. So like looking for what is your ambition at work, I think can help you narrow things down. And for me, that I think is a fairly good indicator. Like there's fluctuations in that over time. And I would say like, it doesn't even have to be a particularly long time for someone to go from saying like, hey, I'm super ambitious. Like I want to take classes outside of work. I want to mentor somebody at work. I want to take on some new responsibility. Those are all signs to me that someone is in superstar mode, right? That they're reaching for something new. And in rockstar mode, I think there's like the signs that I'm looking for are people who are doing excellent work and they're very happy doing that excellent, like continuing to do that excellent work. They feel very satisfied with the challenges that they have, but not complacent, right? Like there's a big difference between rockstar mode and coasting. I think that is sort of especially tricky to understand right now. And the best way that you can assess it is like, is this person still contributing at a high level given their role?
Yeah, it's really interesting, this research from Gallup about how to win the Great Resignation, and we'll put that in the show notes, but they do list some data from a June 2021 survey with Amazon that Gallup found that 57% of U.S. workers want to update their skills, and 48% would consider switching jobs. Now, it's interesting to think from June 2021 to January 2022, which is where we are, has that changed? Because things are changing. We aren't where we may have thought we would be in June 2021. But I think that validates, Jason, what you're saying of this idea of, I want to keep learning new skills. How can I, what's considered upskilling, et cetera. Kim, when you hear that data point about people wanting to update their skills, where does that land for you?
I think that people do in general want to grow. I've met very few people who want everything to stay exactly the same all the time. Furthermore, we're in the business of helping people grow and learn new skills. So music to my ears, cha-ching. But in all seriousness, I think that it is very important that people are growing in the way they want to grow and that they're not being pushed past their limits. I also think it's important to understand the reasons why people want to grow. Do people want to do the things that you do in that next big role, or do they simply want to earn more money? There's nothing wrong with wanting to earn more money, but if you don't want to do the things that you have to do in that next job that pays more money, then you're not going to succeed in that job, and you wind up getting fired often and getting less money. So you want to make sure when you're thinking about yourself, or when you're a leader thinking about understanding what's going on for other people, that you're understanding why they want to grow and the way they want to grow.
Well, I will say, to add a little bit more from that research piece in terms of the work that we do, just to quote, table stakes, they were talking about how managers need to be less like bosses and more like coaches, which is really our framework. And they say that table stakes for the modern coaching manager include things like asking great questions, listening to individualize, using employee strengths to drive engagement and produce measurable business outcomes. And I wonder, Jason, when you think about asking great questions, what are some of the questions that you would ask a team member to really try to understand where are they in this desire to upskill, actually what they're calling here reskill as well? And how do you think about what can you as an organization offer? And what if somebody can't offer those development opportunities? How do you think about that as a manager? What questions do you ask?
This is sort of interesting because I think people are quite open to influence when it comes to being in rockstar mode or superstar mode. And so I'd be really thoughtful about how I want to know this information, but I don't necessarily want to directly ask someone, because I would worry that in directly asking someone that I might push them unintentionally toward one or the other when that's not really what they want. And so what I'm looking for is, instead of a specific question that I'm asking, what I'm looking for are patterns. And so one pattern that I'm looking for is like, how often does this person bring up something new or slightly different or outside of their role when they talk to me? Right? Are they coming in saying, hey, I read this really interesting article about this thing that might be like, maybe it's going to be interesting for Radical Candor. Like, I don't know. Like, or I signed up for a course. Because there's a skill that I'm interested in, and I just wanted you to know that, like, I'm going out there to learn this thing. Or I noticed that there was something we weren't doing over here, and I spent a couple hours last week, and I went in there and I fixed it. Like, I did it. I changed it. So it's better now. Those are the kinds of things that I like. That's someone tipping their hand saying, like, I'm actually eager to try some new things. Like, I'm interested. And at that point, I might ask, I mean, that's great. Hey, are you interested in more opportunities like that? I think we could be very intentional about giving you opportunities to grow in that way. And the reason why it is more to protect people in rockstar mode than actual superstars, because people in rockstar mode look around and they often wind up at come to the same conclusion as Kim, which is like, everybody should be in superstar mode because that's the way that you succeed. The risk that I've seen is you have a bunch of people who are really in rockstar mode, are great and actually quite happy with what they're doing, saying, I want all these development opportunities. And there's a concrete example of this. I was working with a couple of companies ago where someone was coming to me and was like, I want to grow and I want to change, like, I want a big step up in my career and I want like these big new opportunities. And so we like went out of our way to like craft an opportunity for them. And they were so stressed out. They're like, I can't do this. This is like incredibly stressful for me. Like, I want to go back to the way things were. And I was like, how did we wind up? Because I think they were telling me the truth. At the moment, they believed that that's what they wanted. But I wasn't curious enough. Like, I didn't push them hard enough to say, answer Kim's questions. Like, do you really want to do the things that are required of you? Like, have you really thought about what that was like? Especially if you work in a high growth environment where there's a lot of people who are moving on to new roles and things like that. I like have a bias for defending the rock stars, for not allowing them to get swept up in superstar and people in superstar mode sort of wake.
And I think you're exactly right, Jason. The word bias is really important here. I think that very often we do tend subconsciously to think that people should be like us. So when I was in superstar mode, that's why I thought everybody should be in superstar mode, right? And there was a guy, I think, Amy, to your question of what questions do you ask, part of it is just listening to what people tell you. So, and respecting and honoring what people tell you. So there was a guy who worked for me and he was a customer service rep at a startup and he was great. He was fantastic. People sent him donuts. Like, you forget about net promoter score. When your customers are sending you donuts, you know something's going well. So as the company grew, thanks in part to his work, we needed to hire more customer service reps. And I asked him if he wanted to lead the team. And he said, no, I don't want to lead the team. I am an actor. And what I really want to do is leave every day at 4:30 so that I can go be on these off-Broadway productions. This was in New York. To my shame, I did not honor him for that. I kind of thought less of him. And I hired someone to be his manager who really didn't want that job. What that person really wanted was to be the CEO of the company. And he was incredibly arrogant and sort of looked down on this guy who was great at what he did. And the guy wound up quitting and it hurt the company. So that was one of many management mistakes I made at that company. And I just feel really bad about it. I can't believe that I was so arrogant. And yet I think I didn't fully understand how arrogant it was until I found myself in rockstar mode at a different phase in my career. So
tell us about that. How did Kim Scott find herself in rockstar mode?
So I was pregnant with twins and I was working at Google, and I think, maybe it's arrogant to say, I think I was doing a good job anyway, but I had been doing that job for several years at this point. I wasn't necessarily gunning for the next job because I was pregnant with twins. It was a high-risk pregnancy. But someone came along to me and said, do you want to throw your hat in the ring to be the CEO of Twitter? And that was the kind of opportunity earlier in my life I would have really done just about anything to get. So I thought about it and I called my doctor and I said, well, what do you think? And she said, well, do you have to travel for that? Oh, yeah. Can you lie down on the couch for 2 hours every day? Oh, no. And she said, well, what's more important to you, the hearts and lungs of your children or this opportunity? And so it's like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to throw my hat in the ring. And I want to pause here. Just because you're pregnant with twins does not mean you can't be the CEO of Twitter. But I personally, everything is individual. I could not. In fact, I gave a talk and I showed a picture of myself at this point, and you'll see if you see that picture why I could not. You can tell why I couldn't. Anyway, I was not in good shape. So I didn't throw my hat in the ring. And at first I felt a sense of almost like failure and shame. And then I had to realize, you know what? I have got a great job. I'm producing 2 human beings. That's also a great job. And it's okay for me not to take this next big opportunity. But it really took some soul searching for me to get there. But I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Well, and thank goodness. I guess as I hear your story, it just makes me think as folks are listening, dealing with these, like you said, soul searching, these difficult decisions. And so, Jason, as you hear Kim's story, I'm curious if you reflect on how people right now who are maybe having to make some of these tough choices, like I've got to care for, a parent or a child or a spouse or, myself, whether it's health issues, whether it's financial concerns, and yet this thing is pulling me at work. And it feels like something we should drill down into a little bit, because I think that story Kim shared, people can really resonate with that.
Yeah, I think this is a good moment to say that the impact that pandemic has had on working habits is gendered. Like there's a bigger impact on the changes to what women are doing than there is to what men are doing in the pandemic. And that's
Except
in part
in my household where Andy has stepped up and
in aggregate, maybe more than on average, in aggregate, like women are working even less than men are working less, if that makes sense. Like in the resignation, like women are changing their roles even more than men are changing their roles. Women have taken on more care responsibility outside of work than men have as a result of the pandemic, and causing all kinds of disruption to childcare, increasing the need for elder care to care for people who are ill. So like there's some sort of like social expectations here that I think are important to account for, because from my perspective, there's like a big missed opportunity here for, fractional roles, partial work, for people to be flexible, because we worked with a client not that long ago. One of our primary contacts was in this very interesting situation where they had 2 people who sat in a single role. They split up the week, essentially. They performed this role as well or better than an individual could perform it, but it was 2 people operating on sort of a part-time basis. And they had to come up with lots of ways to manage that. Like they had to have a handoff when one person was going off and the other person was coming on. They had a single email address that either of them could respond to. So it was like there was no separation. It was all very strange, except that it allowed them to do these other things in their life that they really cared about. Now, from my perspective, they were not actually in rockstar mode. They were in superstar mode. They're super ambitious at work. And they were collectively growing and changing. The reason why I think the story is so helpful is like, I had never in 20 plus years of working run into that another time, not one other time in 20 some odd years. And what was fascinating to me is like, it's so clear that there are creative ways that we can give people opportunity, even if they do need to care for kids part of the week, right? Like, even if that's part of the blueprint, it's possible to craft roles and jobs that allow people to continue to be ambitious. So I guess like part of me is like, I don't want to throw out the possibility that just because someone has extra responsibility outside of work, that means that, to Kim's point, their default in rockstar mode, right? Maybe they're still in superstar mode, but the world is not in a state that makes it easier for them to actually succeed in being the superstars that they want to be.
Yeah. And I also will say, for example, I had a friend who is a single mom, and she told her boss when she told him that she was pregnant, she said, I need the next big job. Like, I don't imagine that I am taking my foot off the accelerator because I am having this child. I need money more now than ever. And also my feeling is that in the early years, I can hire a nanny more. And by the time this kid is 12, then maybe I'll want to step back and be there for the teen years, which is a legitimate parenting choice. And her boss did not listen to her and didn't give her the next big role. And she left that job and took another much bigger role that had her flying to China all the time. And her boss, when she told him she was going to take this, he was stunned. And she said, but I told you, that's what I wanted. And you didn't listen. It's the same thing as I didn't listen to this guy who told me that he wanted, there are all different reasons why one might want to be in rockstar mode.
Or superstar mode. And I guess I think
or superstar mode.
Yeah, it's just tempting to say, to see someone's situation as the only or even primary factor of like what mode they can or should be in. But I think like part of the problem is the inflexibility of the way that we define work, like the way that we define work. We are leaving a lot of really great things on the table because even there's this sort of mythology about developers, which is like a great developer, like a truly great developer is worth 10 average developer, like software developers.
I hate that. I so disagree with that, but I know you feel the same way.
I also disagree with that, but I do think that there are some people who are twice as productive as the average person, like in the same role. Yeah. Like I've observed someone who is twice as productive, which means that if that person comes to you and says, I have this other ambition that I want to be, I want to do something else with my time. I want to be a botanist. And you're like, well, most companies are going to say, sorry, like you can't work half time. But if you're like, that's the thing that's missing for me in terms of why this has been so stressful, this transition to a world in which people have opened up to the possibility that maybe there's more that they want to do than the role that's immediately in front of them. And maybe that's not with that current company. And two, that there are all these other responsibilities that people have taken on. It's like people have been treating as immutable, like the way that we structure roles. And so as a result, we're losing all of this really great potential and saying, well, sorry, we need someone in rockstar mode here who's going to be here 5 days a week, even though that person might be, 75% as productive as the person who's saying, I'd like to work a 4-day week because I have this other thing I want to do.
Yeah. And I think you raise a really important point. I think there's a bias to think that it is the people who are in rockstar mode who need more flexibility, but more often than not, it's the people in superstar mode. There was a person who worked for me who was one of the most productive people I've ever worked with in my life. He was just incredible. But he needed, sounds ridiculous, but it was like in order for him to function 10 months a year at that level, he needed 2 months a year to like go on a bender and take pictures. And they would get drunk and take a lot of photos. And the company where I worked did not make allowance for that.
Drunk photos, sabbatical allowance.
There was no 2 month a year, go get drunk and take photos. So I had to it was one of the hardest management challenges I ever had to help navigate the bureaucracy. And I treated it like a kind of parental leave. But so I think there's a couple of more things to say about parental leave. One is that I was just talking to a CEO earlier today who said, I am single and somehow that means I have to do all the work because it's not legitimate for me to say I need to go on a date, but it is legitimate for you to say, I've got to take care of my kids. And so I can't do this. She said, I'll never have kids if I can't go on a few dates now. So I think we need flexibility. People who are not parents also need flexibility. Children are not the only thing that take a lot of time in this world. And also I just want to shout out for all the parents who are not, heteronormative parents. There's a lot of parents who have a lot of kids who have 2 moms or 2 dads or two parents who are not binary. And we want to make sure that we're not assuming, and also men have children too. Straight men have children too. Like, we want to make sure that even though you're right, Jason, on average, women do tend to pick up more of that child rearing. I think we draw way too many conclusions from that fact. So I just want to put a pin in that one.
To bring it back to even the words rockstar and superstar mode, Kim, I know how important words are to you. And I think it's just important, if we haven't said it explicitly, why are we talking about modes rather than, oh, you're a rock star, you're a superstar?
Because we want to make sure that we're leaving room for people to change. At different points in everyone's career, they're in different modes. There are times, and it's usually when you're starting a new job, you're coming up a steep learning curve, and so you're in superstar mode, almost by definition. Whereas when you've been in a job for a while and you're not going up such a steep learning curve, you're usually more in rockstar mode. And you don't want to label people. You don't want to put them in a box and leave them there. People change. And if you're going to be a good manager and make sure you're putting the right people in the right roles, you want to make sure that you're changing with people and helping change people's roles as their desires and circumstances change.
The other thing I want to bring in when it comes to words is this idea of potential versus growth. I know one of the kind of origin stories was you were using this performance potential matrix that McKinsey had originally developed, and the word potential rubbed you the wrong way.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that that matrix was originally it was developed for investments, not for people. When I was at this company that used that, I wasn't going to put anyone in the low potential bucket. I don't think there's any such thing as a low potential human being. So I think it's just the wrong way to look at it. It labels people. Then all of a sudden people would be called, they're a low potential. I'm like, that is a horrible, horrible thing. So I was speaking with a leader at that company, and I said, this really bothers me. And it was one of the happiest moments of my career. He's like, yes, words matter. Let's change the words. And we started talking about growth and the importance of growth and making sure that we were giving people the right growth opportunities, not pushing them too hard and not pushing them hard enough. We need to be aware of how people want to grow. It's also really important that managers figure out, what percentage of my team needs to be in superstar mode, what percentage needs to be in rockstar, and it varies from situation to situation.
How do you think about how to make that estimate? What are some of the metrics by which you determine, we actually need some more stability, we need some more folks in rockstar mode here?
I mean, if you're managing a nuclear power plant, I hope that you have a lot of people in rockstar mode who feel a great deal of satisfaction out of keeping things safe. That is really important. So that's an example. I mean, you also need some people who are in growth. It's hard to learn that stuff, but you don't want to have too many people who are distracted by learning the next new thing. You want them very focused on the current job, I think. I mean, I've never managed a nuclear power plant, so I'm really making stuff up.
But you have managed a diamond cutting factory, yes.
And actually, there's an example about that in the book. There was my boss at that company said that he really wanted to understand what the people who were cutting the diamonds were doing. Cutting a diamond is very much, you want someone in rockstar mode. You don't want people coming up the learning curve on these very expensive pieces of rock. And he was
literally rockstar mode.
Yes, literally rockstar mode. He blew up a very large and expensive diamond when he was trying. And he realized, this was not the right kind of job for him. He was more of the deal maker than he was the rock cutter.
So this is kind of Jason's, what do you think you're good at? And then actually putting it into practice. Oh, maybe I'm not so good at cutting diamonds, actually, after all.
Yeah.
Kim, I like the sort of what is people's desire to grow what have they demonstrated, and how have they demonstrated their ability to sort of like grow into that new thing? And what is your need? If those are the strings you're pulling as a manager, like the question of why do I need to know exactly what a diamond cutter is doing? Like, can I be satisfied? And why is the way that I need to figure that out by doing it myself? It's a good question, because it's like, well, how does that help you answer any of those other questions that you're trying to answer? It's not clear to me that it does. Part of the relationship that I could imagine is that you're trying to figure, like you go through a phase where you're trying to figure out, well, I'm managing, let's say, I'm managing engineers of some kind, not computer engineers, but let's say they're mechanical engineers at a nuclear power plant.
Don't go mucking around in that plant, please.
Right. Your background is in electrical engineering. You don't have a ton of background in mechanical engineering, but you're trying to figure out, they're very expensive, these mechanical engineers. It costs a lot of money, and I'm getting some pressure to cut costs. And so I'm starting to think like, well, what are that mechanical engineer? So like I could see like a thought pattern that gets you to a place where you're like, I want to get closer to what the mechanical engineers are doing. But at the same time, I think there's this other part of what we're saying is that knowing what you need or what a team needs is a knowable thing. That's like a pretty big assumption, because I think sometimes some of the best moments that I had in my career supporting people in superstar mode is when someone expressed a desire to do a thing that I had no idea if it was really going to make a huge difference for us as an organization, but they're so excited about it and they're convinced that somehow it's going to help us. And I'm like, well, sure. Like, let's jump off the cliff together and figure out if this is actually going to make a difference. And those have been some of the most, the most pleasant surprises that I've had. Well, I can think of a client that we worked with, one of the engineers that they hired, he was just like, he had a passion for teaching and for learning. And so he built this whole speaker series inside their organization. It had nothing to do with his job. He didn't get compensated anything extra for doing this. This is just something that he wanted to do. And it turned out it started to show up in surveys as one of the best parts of working for this company as an engineer was this amazing speaker series that this person had created. That's part of what I'm saying about inflexibility. I think too often we're convinced that in order to support people in superstar mode or in rockstar mode, they have to fit inside some preconceived notion container that we have created for other people. And often what I've noticed is that the containers that we create for jobs are created in a way sort of based on an average person, someone who is decent at the role, but not necessarily exceptional. So you look at a job description, and you're like, that doesn't describe a rock star. That actually describes a pretty mediocre person in this role. I guess what I would love to see when people think about growth management in the way that you define it is how can I create space for my people in rockstar mode to express their genius, right? What am I doing that's allowing them to really shine? And so for this person, it was this thing that he did, this series of talks that he organized was really expressing his genius. It was around teaching and learning and creating these moments. I hadn't thought about it exactly that way, but it has led to a lot of really interesting sort of pivots in people's careers who have worked for me, is just giving them that space. And it's not just about doing that for superstars. It's also about or people in superstar mode. It's also about doing that for people in rockstar mode.
Yeah, I think you are exactly right. We tend to sort of assume that there's this average. There's no such thing as average, right? There's no such thing. I mean, there is such thing as an average, but there's no such thing as an average person. Correct. And also the thing that you said that really resonated for me is that very often people don't respect the work. The boss, the person I hired to be the boss of the guy who was a great customer service rep, he thought customer service was a role for B players, right? In fact, he explicitly said that. And so he treated his employee like a quote unquote B player, and he didn't respect him. And I think it is really important that we remember when we're hiring people to respect the people and also the work that the people do. You don't need, this guy's opinion about hiring a customer service team was that he needed to hire a bunch of B and C players. And that's not what he needed to do. He needed to hire A players who were really interested in customer support work, who were A plus customer support. And he just viewed it as a lesser role. So there's this kind of judgmental arrogance that creeps in. That's part of also why I don't like the term talent management, is that it kind of invites that kind of judgmental arrogance.
In some ways, it's sort of like a fourth element, or maybe it's like a purple flag. It's a borrow, like a biased purple flag, which is like when you're actually thinking about your team and you're thinking about people's expressed desire for growth, what they've demonstrated in terms of their capability to do new things, and then the team's needs. You want to make sure that you're including in that, you're not biased and focused only on the roles that either you understand the best or that you think are the most important, but you're actually really valuing the contribution of each person on your team. You're weighting that contribution appropriately. I feel like that's such like a healthy sort of mindset for going into any sort of capacity planning. I still don't know exactly what the right thing is to call the thing, but like for going into growth management, if people like took the time to actually bring those elements, that sort of like group of ideas or mindsets to bear, those conversations would be much better, because I do feel like talent management as it exists in most organizations winds up feeling like a cage match where you're you're either defending or attacking. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, so you're defending your team and attacking somebody else's team because you're all like fighting over these resources, when it's usually a very silly way to wind up thinking about it.
Yeah, I think there's another nuance that happens at a lot of companies, which is that when people tend to reserve the highest ratings for employees who are in superstar mode, who are gunning for that next promotion, because a high rating kind of helps justify the promotion, which systematically disadvantages people who are in rockstar mode. Because now all of a sudden, because they don't want that next promotion, they're not going to get the high rating and they're not going to get the big bonus. This doesn't play out everywhere, but this really plays out where at companies that do quote unquote pay for performance. And now all of a sudden you're not paying people who are performing very well because they don't want the next job. And so it's ironic. It's actually very anti-meritocratic, although I don't even like the word. I think meritocracy is bullshit, as it is generally practiced, but that's a whole other podcast. Yeah. So I think that you want to make sure that you're allocating bonuses fairly across people who are in superstar and rockstar mode, is it was a long-winded way of saying. You don't want to pay people in rockstar mode less than people in superstar mode. The financial reward for being in superstar mode comes when they get that promotion, but it shouldn't be reflected in their bonus. So let me give you an example of a time when someone I knew who was in superstar mode had his wings clipped. So shortly after I joined Google, Larry Page told a story about being at a consulting firm, and his boss said, "I want you to do this project this way." And that was going to take him the whole summer. And he had a different idea in which he could do the whole project in 1 hour. His boss just wouldn't let him do it that way and forced him, because his boss was intimidated by Larry, I think. And so Larry drudged away all summer doing it the boss's way. And he said, "I hope no one at Google ever feels that way." He was very conscious. Now, Google was probably over-indexed towards people who are in superstar mode and not respectful enough of people in rockstar mode. But I think that is an example of very often, if you are a manager and you are afraid that someone who works for you is going to wind up being your boss, you should celebrate that. You should not clip that person's wings.
All right. So now it's time for our Radical Candor checklist. These are tips you can use to start putting Radical Candor into practice right away. Tip number 1, if you want to know what mode the folks you work with are in, listen to what they say they want. What is their desire to grow? What's their demonstrated ability to do new things? And what is the team's need that might support that team member's growth?
Tip number 2, when it comes to growth management, don't clip the wings of people who are in superstar mode, and don't disrespect people who are in rockstar mode. Don't sort of view them as lesser mortals, especially if you yourself are in superstar mode. And beware, we have such a bias. When we're in one mode, we want everyone else in that mode with us. So be aware of your own biases.
And tip number 3, don't put people in boxes. All of this is temporary, that none of these states are permanent. And so when you're thinking about people's growth trajectory, don't allow your perception to limit the future choice that they might make.
For more tips, you can go to radicalcandor.com/resources to download our learning guides for practicing radical candor. If you want to see the show notes for this episode, head over to radicalcandor.com/podcast. If you like what you hear, go ahead, rate us, review us on Apple Podcasts. And of course, don't forget to order Kim's latest book, Just Work, How to Root Out Bias, Prejudice, and Bullying to Create a Kick-Ass Culture of Inclusion. And yes, available everywhere books are sold. Finally, if you haven't heard, the Radical Candor store now open. Get your mugs, get your swag, go to radicalcandor.com, click the shop link, and get the Radical Candor framework on your beverage of choice container. Bye for now.
Take care.
Don't put people in boxes. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Our podcast features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff, is produced by our Director of Content, Brandy Neal, and hosted by me, Amy Sandler. Music is by Cliff Goldmacher. Go ahead and follow us on Twitter at Candor and find us online at radicalcandor.com.